So it's kind of interesting because Purim is to be a really joyous holiday. And thank you so much. It's hard to me to think of Purim this week or this year as happy. But let's look at least where we get the idea of Purim from in Esther 9:28 and 29. It says, "Those days should be remembered and observed in every generation, by every family, in every province and every city. These days of Purim should not fail from among the Jews, nor their tremendous perish from remembrance, nor their remembrance perish from their descendants." Thank you. Oh my. And absolutely. So that is really the purpose, in a sense, of Purim. But we also get in chapter 9, verses 20 to 22, an understanding of how we are to celebrate. Mordecai recorded these events, and he sent letters to all the Jews throughout the provinces of King Ahasuerus, both near and far, urging them to celebrate the 14th and 15th days of Adar every day as the days when the Jews got relief from their enemies, and as the month when their sorrow was turned into joy and their mourning into celebration. There were to be days of feasting, celebration, and sending presents of food to one another and giving gifts to the poor. So one of the things we do as a congregation is we try and determine who is needy or who is at home and can't get out. And I think, how many baskets, Donna, did we give out? How many? 18? 15. 15 baskets to different people in the congregation, pretty much based on this scripture, that this is what we are to do. And, you know, I'll tell you why I'm struggling with Purim this year in particular. But we are to remember that in history, approximately 2,400 years ago, a genocide against Jews were attempted. So what does a genocide mean? Destruction. It means extinction. And God saved his people. And from this idea, we get the very famous Jewish quote at holiday time. "They tried to kill us. We survived. Let's eat." There are many mysteries around Purim. Purim took place, interesting enough, in the diaspora. Diaspora meaning they weren't in Israel. They were outside Israel. Really, Shushan was part of the Persian Empire. And God was never mentioned in the book of Esther. And prayer was never mentioned in the book of Esther. And Mordecai, Esther's uncle, told Esther to hide the fact that she was Jewish. And by the way, Esther means to hide oneself. Sometimes it's translated as star, but actually probably the hiding is more exact. And traditionally, we dress in costumes, hiding our identity too, being another identity. So let me tell you the story of Esther in about a minute. These are the cliff notes. King Ahasuerus picked Esther to be his new queen. Her name actually was Hadassah, and she was a Jew. By the way, Hadassah means myrtle tree. Myrtle tree is associated with peace and love and prosperity. Mordecai, Esther's uncle, would not bow down to Haman, who was now second in command to the king. And so Haman found out Mordecai was a Jew and strategized against how to kill Mordecai and all the Jewish people. And Haman got the king to agree to have the Jews killed. Haman cast lots, which, by the way, that's what Purim means lots, to find the day to destroy the Jews. Mordecai convinces Esther to go to the king for help. The king turns on Haman and has him and his family killed on the day the Jews were to be killed. And that's the story. So, you could say, though, this was the beginning of what we would call sort of a modern-day anti-Semitism, if you call 2,400 years ago modern day. But it was certainly anti-Semitism, and some people say anti-Semitism even goes back to the story of Abraham. We won't go into that. But anti-Semitism, if you're not familiar with the word, is best described as Jew hatred. It's a form of racism. And this kind of hatred, and most hatred, starts out with words against the Jews and ends up with violence against the Jews. And you would probably try and figure out why or how do words become violent. Well, inflammatory words repeated over and over again cause what I would call a dehumanizing situation. What does that mean? It means where you make the person seem like they are less than human. And one rationalizes that if they're less than human, it's okay to destroy their property, hurt them, or even kill them. It's almost as if they deserve it. In a number of circles, President Trump is being dehumanized. So some people were not upset when he was shot. Also, Elon Musk is being dehumanized. So some people feel it's okay to vandalize his companies or set the charging stations on fire. And that's why rhetoric, especially, well, in this case, political rhetoric, from leaders is so awful. The very people who are leading us in Washington are using inflammatory words often. And they're certainly not showing the fruit of God's Spirit. But what does this show the rest of the country? That it is okay to hate. That's how it begins. When someone is dehumanized, it doesn't matter how much good they do. It just doesn't matter. People can only see them as people to hate and bring down. Doesn't matter if there are facts that would support that person, or even the truth doesn't matter. When you see others as less than human, you feel you have the right to do anything to them. When this is done specifically to Israel and the Jewish people, that explains how it spreads to violence, ugly behavior, while showing no remorse. So as an example, for many years in Gaza, the kids grew up in schools where they learned how to hate Jews. So it makes sense that on October 7th, some of them felt no remorse, no problems, because they felt they weren't dealing with anybody human, because that's how they learned. That's what they learned. So let me bring this to you and me. That's why it's important we watch what the words we use. Because people will hear us in an argument or a discussion. We will dehumanize somebody, and that then somebody else might say it's okay to do whatever to them. So we see this kind of protesting against Israel and the Jewish people on college campuses. The latest at Barnard and Columbia in New York City. They feel it's okay to break the law in order to get their point across. If innocent people get hurt, that's okay too, because their cause is just in their mind. The reasons that Haman was against Mordecai and then all Jews, we still see playing out today among people who are anti-Semitic. Haman said, they keep themselves separate. They're not like us. They don't intermarry. They don't eat our food. They don't wear our clothes. They don't trim their beads. Everything is different about them, and it's offensive. And then they also say they have different customs and they don't obey the king's laws. And this really was a stretch. There was only one who didn't obey the king's laws, and that was Mordecai when he didn't bow down to Haman. He refused to bow down because he only bows down to the Lord. Throughout history, we see anti-Semitism in the 11th century. The First Crusade was a time when people on their way to the crusade would kill Jews, burn down synagogues. They had an attitude, why would we go and fight God's enemies all the way in Jerusalem when we can fight God's enemies here? And Jews are an enemy of God because we're Christians. That's how they thought. Now, that's not something sanctioned by the Roman Catholic Church at that time, but it was a popular view at that time. In the late 1200s, Jewish people got expelled from England. You know, there was a decree, a law passed, leave. In the mid-1300s, there was something called the Black Death. It was a plague. And who was blamed for it? The Jews. And there are a whole lot of reasons we won't get into, but the Jews were blamed. In the late 1300s, in Spain was the Inquisition. Many Jews were forced to convert to Christianity, or they were killed, or they left the country. And that's why so many Jewish people from Spain ended up in South America. And that's why when they came to South America, they actually said to everybody they were Catholic so that they wouldn't have the same thing happen again in South America. One of the reasons my name is Steve is because my parents didn't want me to appear Jewish so that I wouldn't have to go through what they went through. And so this is a real understanding of the history of anti-Semitism. And then, of course, we won't go into it again, but we do know that Martin Luther, at the end of his life, turned against Jewish people in such a horrific way that even Hitler quoted him for a reason to kill Jews. Because Martin Luther was okay killing Jews at the end of his life. It's kind of, in the 1800s in Russia, you had something called the pogrom, which was mob violence against Jewish people. Anybody watch Fiddler on the Roof? If you haven't seen Fiddler on the Roof, please get it. Great movie. Actually, my wife and I have been watching it the past couple days, just hearing it again. In 1903, there was something called the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. It was a book, actually. And it said that there was an international Jewish conspiracy to control the world. Well, when things, even lies, when lies are told enough times to people, they become the truth. And you still hear it today. Oh yeah, the Jews control the world. They control the banks, they control everything. This is what anti-Semitism is. And so what we're seeing today is, again, anti-Semitism. The difference, though, if you want to be really honest about this, is that this is just a spiritual battle. I understand that it's a physical battle, but it's a spiritual battle because most people just don't know God. And Hasatan just gets in there and feeds them lie after lie after lie. We know Hasatan, or Satan, wants to annihilate Jewish people, get rid of them from the face of the earth. So it makes sense that the people, or the leadership of Iran and the Hamas and the Hezbollah say those words. They want them removed from the face of the earth, all Jewish people. In the movie Fiddler on the Roof, Tevye, who's the main character, has been having this conversation with God. And through the whole play, or musical, he has this conversation. But at this one time, he looks up to God, up to the sky, and he says, I know we are your chosen people, but maybe just once you could choose someone else? And this was right after he learned that there was going to be a pogrom. And they, if you know the story, they were forced to leave. And I think that quote by Tevye actually summarizes the history of the Jewish people. And though they are extremely privileged as a people to be part of God's plan, in not only past plan, present plan, and future plan, yet there's a very high cost to be chosen. And Christians are finding that out as well, because there certainly in the past 4 years has been a fair amount of coming against Christians and Christian beliefs. God promised Abraham, I will bless those who bless you. I will curse those who curse you. God still has a plan for the nation of Israel. God's plan won't be thwarted. So why do people hate the Jews? First of all, people who are hurting need somebody to blame. We know from the holy day of Yom Kippur, there's an Azazel, and the Azazel, if you translate it, is called a scapegoat. And people need a scapegoat to blame for everything that's going on bad. But we see it as spiritual warfare. We know Ephesians 6:12, for our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the powers, against the worldly forces of this darkness, against the spiritual forces of wickedness in heavenly places. God chose the Jewish people. That's why Hasatan hates them. Deuteronomy 7:6. You're a holy people to Adonai your God. From all the peoples of the face of the earth, Adonai your God has chosen you to be his treasured people. God has said in his word very specifically, very clearly, that Israel will always, that's one of those words, right? Always be a nation before him. Unless, and let's read the unless and the promise. Jeremiah 31:34-36. Thus says Adonai, who gives the sun as a light by day and fixed order of the moon and the stars as a light by night, who stirs up the sea so its waves roar. Adonai Tzivaot is his name. Only if this fixed order departs from before me, it is a declaration of Adonai, then also might Israel's offspring cease from being a nation before me for all time. Thus says Adonai, only if heaven can be measured and the foundations of the earth searched out beneath, then also I will cast off the offspring of Israel. For all they have done, it is a declaration of Adonai, which means they're going to be there forever. Because I don't think we'll ever know the full size of the universe. But if Hasatan, if Satan can wipe out the people of Israel, then he proves God a liar. And so that's his job. And we know who the liar really is. It says in John 8:44, you are of your father, the devil, and you want to do the desires of your father. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth because there is no truth in him. Whenever he speaks lies, he is just being himself, for he is a liar and the father of lies. In 2 Corinthians 4:4, in their case, the God of this world has blinded the minds, God's small g, by the way, make sure you see that, blinded the minds of the unbelieving so they might not see the light of the good news of the glory of Messiah, who is the image of God. And from first century forward, even a large part of the church was anti-Semitic. We see that with Constantine. We see that earlier. And that's why Romans 9 through 11 were actually written. Okay? Because it says very specifically that God is not finished with the Jewish people there. It says to the church, make the Jewish people jealous, meaning of the relationship you have with me, so that they too will come back. And it says when they do come back in Romans 11, there will be revival, that the whole world will be revived. And all of that had to be written because of the anti-Semitism in the hearts of people, and in this case, believers. Purim is a reminder for us that God is in control, even if we don't hear him or see him. Purim should be a reminder that we should rejoice because we are blessed to live in the U.S., even with all its faults. Purim is a reminder that we should not be complacent, but make sure that we are active in God's plan for his glory. So I'd like to spend 2 or 3 minutes just talking about not being complacent. If you're not complacent, it means you're doing something. First of all, as believers, we have to always be seen as believers. Meaning that when we come against something, we have to do it God's way. We have to hear from God. We can't just march into somebody's hotel, 100 of us, and sit down, because that's against the law. There are a number of ways we can protest. We can write letters. We can do all sorts of things, but we have to remain the credible vision of God's disciples here on earth. Because it says in a number of places, in Ephesians and in John 17 in particular, that they will know us by our love for one another. We know that love never fails. So this is who we have to be, and yet we should not be quiet. We cannot be quiet, because if we are, the noise will just run us over. So we have to find ways that are godly to make our voices heard. Because to say nothing is wrong as well. And who knows how God will lead us, but we better be really sure that it's God telling us to do various things, because people are looking at us, and we are representing the Lord. So, can we rejoice during Purim? I certainly feel we can. But I also feel that realistically we have to look at what's happening in the world and how, unfortunately, history is repeating, and repeating. And so in order for the United States not to repeat what has happened throughout the world towards Jews, we have to really pray, and then we have to see what God is calling us to do. Father, I thank you and praise you for this time. I ask you, Lord, to give us wisdom, to give us tremendous wisdom, Lord, because we want to trust you in every regard. We want to obey you, and so we've got to hear your voice to obey you. We've got to search Scripture to know what you would want. And so, Lord, speak to us. But, Lord, when the cry from the Holocaust was never again, and here we are in a situation where it's beginning again. Lord, anoint us. Give us wisdom. So as much as we can, let us rejoice. But just like at weddings where the tradition in Judaism is to throw down a goblet or a glass and stomp on it, and the origins of that was a rabbi trying to tell the people at a wedding, which was incredibly joyous, to not forget the seriousness of life, especially for Jewish people. So, Father, I just come to you humbly, Lord, and ask for your wisdom, your desires, and that we would truly be loving and compassionate and yet strong to represent you in all that we do. We bless you in the name of Yeshua.